everyone who sees me, not just in The Return of the Witches, but all the time, anywhere, every time, because this is what you see. I always have the painting behind me that Lori Sweet created. And of course, Joan herself is always here. And I forget, that, oh yeah, this is just, if you're going to see me on camera, you're going to see all my beautiful witch support. And then people will say, oh, is that Joan of Arc? Oh, yes, of course. And everyone wants to know, who is this? Who is this astonishing, magnificent, needle felt witch doll, Hyldemoer of Wyrd? And so I don't know if we say creator, because Hyldemoer created herself, but the magnificent artist, Paton Brown, is with us to talk about the birthing process that Hyldemoer of Wyrd requested for herself. Hyldemoer is a needle felt witch doll, and Polly Paton Brown is her first mother. And accompanying this video is a PDF, and you can get all the information and this active link to PollyPatonBrownArtist.com. There's Polly in the garden. She lives in the beautiful part of England, Shropshire. And this list could go on a lot longer. Polly is an artist. Polly is a doll maker, a very sacred doll maker. Polly is a spiritual accompanist. She accompanies you as you are walking in your spiritual path. She creates needle felt, and she's going to teach us a little bit about the intricacies, the miracle. It's really a miracle process. She's a ceremonialist. You're going to get a little taste and touch of the ceremonies that create her as she creates them. And she also sings in the spirit, in tongues. And we are very blessed in the Return of the Witches Jeanne d'Arc listening pilgrimage to get to experience live the spirit moving through Polly for each one of our 13 witches. So Polly, how does this story begin?
Well, the story of this particular wonderful being, we called herself Hyldemoer of Wyrd, started when you and I, Janet, and some others were in our regular weekly meeting with Perdita, where we meet together to talk about our dead and ways of working with the dead. And alongside those meetings, we were talking about the pilgrimage and the women who've been murdered over the years. And in one particular meeting, one of our members had an experience of bringing forth the no-name women who had been murdered in Trier, wasn't it? Yes. And from that experience, a seed was planted in me for me, I use my hands to pray. I don't use words very much. I use my hands. And I got a real sense of, I had to sew the names of these women. I had to use my hands and to sew them on hearts. So I would sit in the garden to do that. And I have an elder tree in my garden. Well, several, but this particular one kept drawing me and to go and sit by as I sewed. Now, the elder tree in folklore is known as the witch's tree. And in fact, I once asked a guy who used to do some gardening for us to cut down part of an elder tree because it was falling apart, and I wanted it pruning, and he was horrified, he wouldn't touch it. He said, "Oh, I can't do that without asking, because there's real, you don't tamper with the spirit who lives within the elder tree." which is Hyldemoer. But I didn't know her name then. And at that time, I had nothing to do with pagan things. I was a good evangelical Christian. So, you know, I would have run throwing salt over my shoulder and sprinkling holy water had I known. But anyway, so the elder tree began to share with me as I sat and I sewed that I was to sew the names of all the witches. Now, you had asked me for a doll for the pilgrimage, and I wanted to get on. And what came through from the elder tree was, no, you can't start the doll without doing this. So the reason I'm sharing this is because these sacred dolls, their beginnings are far beyond, before what I might think of as their beginning. Their beginning, her beginning, came as I made those hearts. So we got to Beltane, and I'd finished the hearts, and I got the whisper, it's time. So I could do a ceremony. So these are 3 other very important dolls to me. The green one is the first doll I ever made, and I'll tell her story another day. She was the doll that, when a sycamore tree told me to leave an offering in the hedgerow, and that's how it started. Then the other doll with the little shawl on was the first doll I made as an apology to all the witches who had been murdered, and all the witches who for me, when I was part of a very evangelical group, we had prayed against. And I'd come to recognize that that was bad magic, and that I was actually doing the things that people had accused the witches of doing. So I made the doll as an apology. And the other doll is just called the Ancestor, and she's a pregnant ancestor, and she's pregnant with new beginnings. So on Beltane, I gathered these dolls, and then the stones that you can see on the table, they were all, they're from Iona, and they represent our Perdita's group. But actually, I see now when I look at the pilgrimage on the page, you know, that slide you put up, there's a circle of stones. So it kind of connects. There's a rosary there made out of Irish marble, which are my roots. And there's some red thread. And then there's a circular loom, which represents the web of Wyrd, which is very, very fundamental to who this doll became, because I didn't know anything about the web of Wyrd when I started to make Hyldemoer, but I knew to put that circular loom there. I have no idea why, but that's the way she works. So I had a ceremony, and we hung the hearts up on the tree, my partner and I, and we said for each one, we named them. We remember your death. We celebrate your life. And it was only after that we'd done that and it was completed that I was able then to start making Hyldemoer. Now, we talked about needle felting. So Hyldemoer kind of started off like this. That's how she's made of raw fleece. And for those who maybe don't know, when you're needle felting, what you're doing is you're putting a tiny barbed needle that's very, very sharp, and you're pushing it into the fleece so it grabs. You just keep folding it and folding it and folding it. And eventually you sculpt the shape. So that's how she started. But for me, every stab is a prayer, because I set the intention. And I always have ceremony and ritual when I light a candle, I set an intention, I call on I cast a circle, I call on the directions, and I call on the elements. And Hyldemoer, it'll be in the PDF. She was I didn't know her name then, and she was just a clump of fleece on the table, but she was very clear that she wanted me to felt in the directions and the elements. So within her body, there are the different colors. So even before this part, right in the central part of her body, there is a yellow layer for air. There is a red layer for south. There is a blue layer for west and a brown layer. Well, it's kind of multicolored for earth. And then there's a pure white layer for the spirit, for the center. And with each one, she gave a prayer and a spell for me to pray into. But even before we got to that, right in her center, I normally put things in their heart that have to do with the intention. So there is some elderflower, there is hawthorn, there is blackthorn, which both have to do with protection. There's tiny apple blossom and pear blossom. And when I asked her what the blossoms were for, because they were hardly open, she said, it's for everything that will blossom through the pilgrimage. So that's in her heart. And there was a tiny, tight little apple blossom. Now, I know there's questions about whether, the tree in the book in Genesis, whether it was really an apple tree. But symbolically, we connect Eve, don't we, to the apple. And when I saw right on my path this tiny little heart-shaped blossom, really tight little bud, I knew it was to go in to signify, to represent, and to kind of heal everything that has been thrown at Eve and therefore thrown at women. So that's at her heart, is the healing of that curse. So then I just made her. I carried on, So when I got to, so if we go back to the other slide of the body with the names on it, she was very clear as I made her that she wanted all the names of the witches needle felted into her body. And the ones I remember the most is that she's got Jezebel across at one place across her chest, which it may be on another layer, but then she's got Boudica on her back, and she said, Boudica has got your back. I remember writing that in my journal because I was going to put it lower down, and there was a very clear note to go across your back. Boudica has got.
Well, if there's anyone you want to have your back, it's Boudica.
Absolutely. And then the other ways that they speak, and she spoke particularly, is as, so I was making hands, and making hands on needle felted dolls can be tricky. And very often you leave them as like a little mitten, but no, she wanted fingers. So I had to quickly learn how to cover wire, very fine wire in needle felt. And she said she wanted large hands, and she wanted them to have like lichen and moss on them. And I was whittering to myself as I was making them, oh, they don't look realistic enough. And in my head, the voice came, well, that depends which reality you're in. So she has a real sense of humor, this being. But her hands, as I made them, they just remind me of tree roots and tree branches. In fact, every part of her has got a message. So when I was making her face, and I made her eyes, and she was very clear that she wanted green eyes. And then I'd made them, and then she said they're not big enough. And I said, but they're in proportion. She said, I don't care. They're not big enough. So I had to make them bigger. And she said, you need to widen your perspective. Oh. Your perspective is too narrow. You see things, you need to see the big picture. You need big eyes to do that. Then she said about her nose, again, she's got very wide nostrils. And what came through with that was that if we were devoted to this path of reclaiming the old stories, the creatures would help us regain our sense of smell. And then, of course, last week in the pilgrimage, we had that whole thing from dear Sophie and Mary Magdalene about smell. I nearly fell off my seat.
Yeah, the
And I
gospel
thought, is
according to
Hyldemoer jumping up and down in the background? So yeah. The other thing that's in her heart that I meant to say is a little piece of a badger's foot. Because again, months ago, as you know and others know, I had a magical encounter with a badger in January for 5 days. And part of the magic of that time was that he said, that came through from the badger, was that we had to stay close to the dirt. We had to dig deep for the stories before the stories that we've been told, the stories that are held in the land and in the old ways. So in her heart is a tiny piece of a badger's foot. So I forgot to say that. That's pretty important. So, you know, it's very difficult. People say to me, oh, can you make me a doll? But you never know what they're going to ask you to do, or what they're going to bring to you. So the other thing is, as I was making her, I got the symbol on her chest of the infinity symbol. And I hadn't seen, it was Laurie that pointed out to me that on the painting up in the corner is the same symbol, the triple spiral.
Yeah, here she is with this very Celtic underneath her blackthorn necklace.
Yeah, a blackthorn for protection.
Incredible female trinity. And the female trinity is huge for me because that was my assignment from Joan of Arc, to come up with the female trinity. And I said, really? And Sabin Bailey, the tarot and our ceremonialist, she said that Joan said, don't worry about it. I'll come to you in the dream time. And she did. And so we now say it in every anointing: she who was, she who is, she who ever shall be. Life without end, world without end, love does not end. But Laurie Sweet had no way of knowing any of that.
No.
Here she is painting it. And she's so adorable. She says, I don't know why, but I just and there it is.
There it is.
Long before Hyldemoer, long before my assignment to come up with the female trinity. It is just, well, why are we surprised that all of the songs and the 13 witches and what happens in the ceremony, it's all so interconnected because we are not in charge. It is being done to us. Yeah. So the most out of all of the amazing things about her is her name. And I was so deeply moved, and I remembered the date on May 6th. You came in our Fire Gazers private group where we work with the dead and said, well, she's announced her name, Hyldemoer of Wyrd. What can you tell us about her announcement?
Well, the first part of her name, Hyldemoer, I discovered. I didn't know when she told me, but I found out afterwards. Because I knew there were old names to do with the elder tree, but I knew them as Old Gal and Lady Elsa. I think it's Elson. And I hadn't really registered Hyldemoer. But when I looked into it, that's a very ancient name for the spirit who lives in the elder tree. And she is very much part of the dark feminine tradition. You don't mess with Hyldemoer spirits. You really don't. Which is interesting because the tree itself, the berries and the blossoms are hugely used in healing. You know, I take elderberry berries all the time as a tincture because I've got an autoimmune disease, so they help my immune system. So we've got this healing tree, but the spirit who lives within her is a very powerful, don't mess with me type. Has that message, that way about her. And Wyrd, when I looked into that, I mean, it's such a big subject, but it's really, I wrote down the phrase one of the phrases that I read about it, because I knew I wouldn't remember it. Max says she's a fate goddess who personified causation, change, and movement through time. That's who Wyrd was. It's the name. There's many different names given to the goddess, and it's where a lot of other words come from, like the word for worship, the weirding women, the weirding peas, which is a way of divination. The old English word for weird used to mean destiny, but it got changed during the churchmen changed it to mean eerie. So the web of Wyrd in Anglo-Saxon times would be known as, the very, very primal earth goddess who spun and weaved everything into being. So she's connected to the fates. When we see when you look into all the ancient cultures, they have these goddess figures, or female trinities again, spinning and weaving. They all have distaffs. They have spindles. Now, I didn't know, again, when we think about going back, that I got called to spin and weave years ago. I had this urge to learn how to spin when I was still living in a fundamentalist Christian community. So it's been there, and I had no idea. And over recent years, I started to weave. So I would weave this kind of thing, just little, and this is prayer. But I didn't know, I was still in the church then, I didn't know that I was partaking in something that would have got me burnt a few centuries ago. So spinning and weaving have been, they're part of the web of Wyrd, but also they've been part of the old ways that women have prayed, so much so that the church forbade them. There's all sorts of, in some of the books, they're called penitentials. So they were what churchmen were given, and it was their list of questions that they had to ask the people who were being questioned. And a lot of it was connected to spinning and weaving. So she asked for a distaff and she asked for a spindle. So I had to make them with my partner's help. She's very good at it. I said, how do I do a distaff? She said, no, that's easy. I thought, well, it might be for you. But she asked for a basket as well.
Well,
again,
she asked for a lot.
She did.
Let me see if I can find it here. She also demanded, I thought this was so cute, you had to go up in the loft to find this brown piece of
That's
fabric.
right.
Because she wanted it, and she wanted it now.
That's right. She said, I was going to go to bed, and she said, I want a shawl, a plaid, as she called it. And I said, well, she said, I want a plaid. And so by plaid, that means a woven cloth. And it's it's a Scottish term. And I knew up in my attic, I've got lots of remnants because I go to the Hebrides, used to go to Hebrides a lot. So I had to go rooting and rummaging to find this so she could have a shawl for the night. So yes.
You'll be happy to know now that it's her blanket. I put it over her at night.
Lovely.
When she goes to sleep. So everyone can see her distaff and her
spindle. So the other thing that I'm noticing and remembering are the flowers around her base. And, the garden of reverence, she was going to be in the garden. But what really came through that was that where the flames would have first reached a woman who was being burnt, she wanted flowers. She was replacing the flames with flowers.
I didn't get that. I didn't get, okay. Oh, I didn't get that. Of course. And look at them. Look at these magnificent.
So the blue flowers, the red and the yellow are poppies, and they flourish on rubbish heaps. And yeah, they're on barren ground. The seeds will stay in the land until the conditions are right. And the little blue ones are forget-me-nots. Because
Oh, well, duh, of course, right?
yeah,
Forget me not. And the fact that poppies come out of a rubbish heap means that
yeah,
poppies are rising out of
yeah,
the flames.
absolutely.
I didn't understand that. I'm so grateful she demanded. Oh, here she has her flowers in the back. Oh, and a couple purple.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Well, we are, Hyldemoer, you will be very happy, absolutely not forgetting these 13 women who represent, never mind 13,000, 13 million. They represent 3,000 years of women and witches and children and men being abused. We promise we will forget them not. This, if I have a favorite picture, is my favorite picture of her that you sent us, that you're saying goodnight.
Yeah.
Look at her. And I do this now every night. I hold, when she arrived, I brought her, oh, come on, in here to be with her friends. And I brought her over. The very first thing I did, I brought her over to Joan so that they could kiss. So they had a sweet little kiss. And then I said, okay, this is going to be your place on the altar. And she asked you to send this beautiful little piece of blue plaid, also from the Isle of Lewis.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So this is the altar cloth. And then it was nighttime. It was time to turn off the computer, and I couldn't leave her in here. I didn't feel right. So I said, Hyldemoer, do you want to sleep with me? Because of that picture. Say, okay, if Hyldemoer slept with Polly, then Hyldemoer probably wants to sleep with Janet. So I brought her in my room. I go, okay, now what do I do? And I happen to have a nice decorative pillow on the bed. So that is her pillow. And then I cover her in her beautiful brown plaid. Well, then I felt like I can't leave Joan alone here. So Joan is right next to Hyldemoer, who's on my nightstand right next to me. So there I am. And it's because of this picture. I said, well, let's pray. And I hold Hyldemoer's left hand with my left hand. And then, because they're so close, I put my right hand on Joan's hand and we pray. Now, Polly, dolls, right? You're a doll maker. And little girls love their dolls. I had a particular doll that I was just obsessed with, just adored. I'm 72, turning 73 in 2 days. And when I hold her hand and Joan's hand and say a prayer at night, I'm 6.
Yeah.
I am 6 again. I'm saying my prayers before bed again. And I am remembering at a very, very deep level what it's like to be a child witch. A child who prays. Well, I mean, what is Janet's definition of prayer? A spiritually independent woman who prays.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm a very spiritually independent woman, and I pray kind of all the time, right? Everything is a prayer. Like everything you do with your hands is a prayer. Everything I do, every deep soul, it's all a prayer. But there is something holding her hand and saying, let us pray,
Yeah.
holding her two hands. So there's three of us. And we are connected in this triangle. And we say, the Queen's love. We say the Hail Mary the way I say it. Sometimes we say the rosary. I just turn to them in the dark and say, well, what do you want to do? How shall we pray? It's magical. And from the very first time she was with me, the very first time the two of them slept with me, I, at that time, had a concern, a problem with the pilgrimage. I know the 13, that's crystal clear. I've had the 13, and I've been able to find the champions. It was very clear that Jezebel would be championed by Alison Sharon. It was very, very clear that Mary Magdalene would be championed by Sophie Strand, who wrote a novel about her, and so on. But there were three. No matter what I did, nobody was responding, which I'm not used to. I'm used to saying, hey, we got this pilgrimage, and people go, yeah, of course I'll come and play. And the three are the First Nations. So the largest Holocaust of all time is when the Europeans came. We can't even begin to count how many First Peoples in the Americas, South America, Central America, Mexico, what's now called the United States, Canada. It's just unspeakable. But I couldn't find, I thought maybe I'm not asking correctly. Anyway, I wasn't finding anyone to be a champion for a particular Native American woman. I was really struggling to find someone to be a spokesperson for Anarcha. Anarcha is a 17-year-old enslaved girl who was just tortured at a level that is incomprehensible by the man who is considered the father of gynecology, but he experimented on her 30 times on vaginal surgeries without anesthesia. If there's one man on this earth I loathe, it's Dr. James Marion Sims. And I couldn't find anybody to speak for her. And then the third is Mary Turner, the worst lynching in the history of lynching. So I had this issue as I'm falling asleep. I cannot say that I asked, hey, Joan, hey, Hyldemoer, would you solve this problem for me? I didn't, but they solved it that night. They solved it that night. Now, I always sleep with paper. Always, because I'm awakened in the night, right? In the night, I received the answer, and it's so perfect that I kind of did and you couldn't think of this yourself, Janet, but I couldn't, because, I had this idea that there had to be one story of a Native American woman and one woman who would come and tell that story, and that would represent. No, the two of them worked on me all night. And the answer is that every single one of us in the pilgrimage is the champion for the First Nations. Every single one of us in the champion is the champion for every enslaved woman, man, and child. And every one of us in the pilgrimage is the champion for everyone around the world. It's not just an American story. Everyone that's assaulted, attacked on the street because they are other. And I woke knowing, oh, wait a second, this is the heart and soul of the pilgrimage, that it's not enough to listen to an external idea. Here's what happened to Queen Jezebel. Oh, that's too bad. Now I will step forward and I will find the name of a person whose land was stolen under my feet. I will find the name of a person who is lynched, attacked where I live, And that could be Switzerland. That could be France. It's not just, you know, we think of the word lynching as an American story. Every single one of us. And I think when we do this, the healing of the pilgrimage, what does Hyldemoer say? Forget them not. They're real. And so each one of us will tell the story. They solved the problem. Janet didn't. All I did, I guess you could say, in the night was listen. And so from then I went, oh, they're coming to bed with me every night. Now, I have never slept like this. It's a deep memory sleep every night without fail. It's like, oh, we're going deep. And there is a part of me that thinks, maybe I should leave you in the office tonight. And I go, no. Now I have to. Joan and Janet, and the most amazing thing that happened interviewing Allison Sharon, our first champion for Jezebel, because Jezebel's story is all about her name, you know, and then it gets turned into this, you Jezebel. And after the recording was over, I don't know why, but I just said to Allison, you know, Janet, there's nobody in my extended, huge Irish, there is no Janet anywhere in sight. My parents are dead. I don't know where that name came from. And as we're chatting, and I said, you know, it's not pretty, Janet. Allison looks down. Obviously, she's going on her phone, but I don't know that. She looks back up and she says, do you know what Janet means? I said, yeah, it's like connected with John. She said, no, it means little Joan.
Yeah.
Oh. So little Joan, big Joan, and ancient goddess Hyldemoer of the elder tree, we now pray and sleep together. And I bring her downstairs for dinner.
Oh, I love it.
Deep soul, right? I mean, it's just like I'm 6 again. Hyldemoer, where do you want to go? Hyldemoer, what do you want to do?
Yeah, I know that if you told me, because it's only last autumn, last September, I made my first doll. I had no experience, no understanding. I didn't know about puppets and the way dolls have been used through the millennia, you know, by healing women. I hadn't got a clue. I remember coming to Fire Gazers and talking about it, and Perdita saying, oh, well, you know, dolls have been a part of, and I said, have they? But that's what's so wonderful for me, because I you know, the spirit shows me to do these things, and then, or the doll will show me to do something, and then I find out about it afterwards, that I've been doing things that are, you know, part of history.
This is, for me, the essential mystical wisdom. It doesn't come from your planning, your goal setting. That's patriarchal linear thinking. Instead, it happens to you, and then after. So after I create anointing, after I experience a prayer, after some words come through, after this pilgrimage idea comes, then invariably the intellectual foundation, the book shows up, the teaching shows up, somebody comes along to explain it. But you're not coming from, oh, right. In ancient times, the doll was the way we communicated with our dead ancestors. Therefore, I, Polly, will now create a witch. Of course not. And it's so much more miraculous, isn't it, when you find out after, and you're just sort of shaking in recognition. Oh,
that's right. I mean, in her basket, one of the things that she's got in her basket is a little knotted cord. That little cord on the handle,
right,
which is called a witch's ladder. So it's a knotted cord, and and it's got 9 knots. And I didn't know that when she told me to use not magic. She said, I want not magic. I'd never heard of the phrase not magic. I've done macrame and things since the 1970s. I am fascinated by knots. I did my yachtmaster sailing qualification I used to go sailing, and when I gave up sailing, the only thing I kept were the books of knots.
Well, and we now know from Max Dashew's book, Witches and Pagans, that especially in Scotland, making knots, so a woman, you can call me a witch, but all women knew how to do this. You would make, you'd say your prayers
That's
in a
right.
knotted rope, and then you'd put it around the wrist of someone that was suffering, around the waist of your husband.
Right.
And so it was an incantation, an invocation. It's prayer. Now, you know, another thing that's so interesting about this now that you point out is that the original rosaries, I mean, it's called
Yes.
a rosary because it's dried roses, but lots and lots of monks and nuns and religious people would have knots. They would have rope rosaries, which
Well,
is such a reminder that all of
yeah.
these prayers are witch, female, goddess. What else is in here?
Well, just let me tell you something else about the knots, Janet, because what Hyldemoer showed me is because one of my I don't know, life callings, one of my passions is about, because I've left the church. I left the church a long time ago, but I still have a passionate devotion to Yeshua, and my heart is very much, for people who have been wounded by the church, who are still in the church. And I still belong. I'm a sister of Belcoeur that has Christ at the center, the beloved, we call him, and I'm a member of the Irony community, which is a justice and peace activist community. And I have this battle. I can't be in that. I'm too pagan, I can't, and it's going on and on and on. And then when I learned about, because after she told me about the knots, I went and read Max's book, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I remembered when I took my vows as a member of the Iona community, we sing a song as you go up the Iona Abbey sort of central aisle. We sing St. Patrick's breastplate, which is the deer cry, I bind to me this day. That is a knot prayer. So as I took my vows in this organization that is, works with Yeshua, I was singing a pagan song.
Exactly. Well,
Which
that's what
is,
we're discovering about the
yeah,
Christian religion, which of course is birthed out of the Jewish religion. It is ancient goddess stuff. It
yeah,
is. It's
totally.
just that the boys overlaid
Yeah,
rules and dogma and theology, but at its core, underneath, there
yeah,
is goddess worship because that's humanity. That's
yeah, yeah.
right. I forgot who said it, but because I would like to attribute them, but I am remembering that somebody said, you have to understand that the 5,000 years of patriarchy is an aberration. It's just an aberration. For 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, humanity has worshiped the goddess in the air, the goddess in the water, the goddess in the land, the goddess in a female's body. There was nothing more holy than the female body. And so when humanity began to worship a male god, of light and law and thought and dogma, we became divorced from, separated from the land and from the female body. And so this is what the pilgrimage is all about.
Absolutely.
That is what this magnificent divine womb symbol, the reverence thing, once again, it was given to me, not that, oh, Janet decided. I was awakened in the middle of the night in 2018, July of 2018, we were doing a very, very difficult Ho'oponopono intensive that Kalahela and I didn't intend to be about sexual healing, but everybody that showed up was someone that had been sexually abused. And so we were cutting the aka cords of rapists going back 3,000 years. It was extraordinarily difficult. And I was becoming very, very angry. Yeah, right, to the patriarchy and to men. So, because I can't figure it out for myself, and I didn't have Joan and Hyldemoer with me at the time, so Sophia woke me in the middle of the night and clearly said, it was not a power structure. It was a reverence structure. And I knew immediately she was saying, you can't just say, okay, patriarchy sucks, so let's have matriarchy. That would still be a power structure. It wasn't a power structure, you idiot. Janet, pay attention, little Joan. It was a reverence. So the word reverence, which I didn't ever use that word, it just landed, and here we are. And she's asking us to create, there's her divine womb, and Lori painted it into the painting. It's the reverence for all bodies, the body of the land, the body. So of course, Hyldemoer is holding this memory of how we prayed on the land, with the land, in the land, of the land. And we can, Polly, with you, with me, with Hyldemoer, with Joan, with everyone in the pilgrimage, we can and we must restore this reverence for one another, reverence for the land, reverence for the mother. I love this so much.
It's cute, isn't it? She loves her basket, and she's got lots of healing things in there. So she's got fleece, and there was
Here's the fleece.
So a bit of shit. That's just a gift from the land, from where she came from. She wanted you to have that.
And she has a little, tell us about this.
So this fir, this is from the fir trees. So one day when I was in the process of making her, I was walking in the local woodland where I walk, and I started to notice ferns unfurling, and they're all in groups of 3, and they reminded me of women or girls.
Of course, they were in groups of 3, right?
You know, and I turned a corner, and there was there'd been some clearing going on. There was a grove with an oak tree in it, surrounded by different trees. It was a group of 3 fir trees, and when I looked at them, I just found myself in tears for the groups of sisters who would have, who had been killed. So she was one of that came from one of those fir trees. And then there's hair there I see from Bonnie Lass, my little fire horse.
Oh, so this is the hair of your horse.
Yes, and she was the one on Where the Rose I wrote about when I wrote about the sexuality stuff for Beltane.
Oh, here's a 3. Look at this, magnificent. This is the first.
So they're hazelnuts. They're hazelnuts, and they're just a reminder of the stories about the wisdom connected to the hazelnut that the salmon swallows. So that's a hazel tree from my labyrinth, where I've got my labyrinth. She guards the labyrinth.
Well, and this means the world to me because I'm a writer, and everything that, well, I shouldn't say everything I create, but most is words, words, words. So to have hazelnut, and I am mostly Irish. All right, so now, okay, I have a story to tell you about this. Tell us about the feather.
So that's a swan feather, and it's gifted by some swans that are on the lake where I was, and where I am near the woods, and where I've got my little art studio, and swans have again been messengers to me before I knew about I knew nothing about them. So but I knew they were calling me.
Look at this. I haven't opened the basket until just now. When Hyldemoer arrived, I gave her an osprey feather because osprey is my totem, and I thought, oh, she'll like that osprey feather. The next day, I went in my son's room, which is sort of the dumping ground right now. I had wood floors put in, everything is in, and look what was there. It wasn't there before. And I looked at it and I said, okay, I think this is for Hyldemoer. So she holds it. Now look at these two. Look at these two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So she
Well,
holds.
the swans go between the worlds. So, and the bard would have worn swan feather cloaks. And in fact, in some of the tombs in Cornwall, there's been in burial chambers, things have been discovered covered in swan feather cloaks. So yeah, but I didn't know that when I was given the feathers.
Exactly. This is the whole
Yeah.
point. And I didn't know because I hadn't opened the basket. So here she is holding an osprey and I don't know, a magic feather because we don't know. So it's a swan that flew across the pond. Now there's a rock in here. Tell us about
So
that.
that's from Iona. That's from the Isle of Iona. And when I was praying right at the beginning for the no-name woman who was stoned, and every year they would stone that statue of her in Trier. So when we prayed with, in our Fire Gazers group, so I one of this, and I think because for me, the Hebrides and Iona particularly have been places where my creativity was gifted, was released on those islands. So
here is the Iona stone. It's beautiful, and it's very light. Next, we have.
I can't remember
this is like Christmas.
I know.
Ooh.
Okay. So that's from the tree, the birch tree, in the woods, and it was a little crown that she wore because she said that Joan danced. The beech tree, not birch tree, beech tree. It's from a small young beech tree, and she wanted. So for a few days, she wore a crown, a little crown of. And I said, but it'll be dead by the time it reaches Janet. And she said, don't be stupid. The dead never die. Nothing that's living ever dies. And it was like, haven't you learned anything yet, Polly? That the essence will still be in it. So that was a tribute to Joan, really, and her friends who danced in the forest around the beech tree.
I think this is a little piece from maybe the fir.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is Christmas. And I'm going to turn it over because the things at the bottom now are very, very small. There are 2, 3. Oh, here's a little cap of an acorn, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's from the oak tree.
There's a tiny.
Okay. So that's a piece of wax.
Oh, from the ceremony.
So that was from the last ceremony that I did before she came to you. I went to the grove and prayed the rosary and walked, cast a circle and prayed for the pilgrimage. And here she is. And she said that she wanted to take a poppet. She wanted her own doll to leave so that she never leaves the grove.
So she's with you in the form of that little red and pink golden haired.
Now, when I lit the candle, it ran and it made me go, when you get goosebumps, when I looked down, the candle wax had run on the ground and it looked like a river of blood.
Right.
And it was one of those moments that when I was cleaning it up, because I thought, well, I don't know if it'll hurt the wildlife, but I realized there was a part of me as well cleaning up and hiding any trace of my ceremony. So that was an old memory of not wanting to be found out for having ceremonies in the woods. But yeah, so part of that wax was from the candle that we.
So this is the candle.
Yeah, that's the candle. And then when it was burnt, it ran into like a river. And behind Hyldemoer, that just behind her you can't really see, but the roots go into like a deep cavern. So to start with, I hung the poppet on the youngest fir tree, or the fir tree sisters, as I call them. But just last week, she asked to be placed in the tree. So now I go back. Well, it was a couple of weeks ago. I go back once a week to pray there, and I put fresh leaves or blossom around her and pray.
Oh,
She's tucked away out of sight, so the gamekeepers don't see it.
oh, right. And then I'm looking to see if I think there is a picture here of that red, but I'm not finding it, the wax.
Mhm.
So then there's this tiny little tiny.
That is I think that's a beech nut.
Oh, oh. So everybody's going back in your basket, Hyldemoer. The Iona stone, the wax, the beech nut, the acorn crown, the hazelnuts for wisdom, the horsehair. What's the horse's name?
Bonnie Lass. That's from Bonnie Lass.
Bonnie Lass.
The fiery little being.
This has a magnificent smell. Joan's crown. Now, the thing that's such a hoot about Joan's crown is, I don't know why, but the very first thing I got for the pilgrimage, I had to have this crown. I don't know. I didn't know why. And it's Joan's crown. And the swan feather.
Yeah.
And then the fleece to hold it all. What do you think, Hyldemoer? You like your basket? You want to come say thank you to Polly for? Oh, and tell us about her blackthorn necklace.
Yeah, so the blackthorn necklace, the blackthorn is really, again, a tree that gives protection, that you can pray with for protection. And again, it's another kind of tree that you don't mess with. And so she said she wanted a blackthorn around her neck, because just as a reminder, like, we are rising and don't mess with us, really, because the witches are coming back, and we're for peace and for love, and actually we're not gonna stop. So, but it's also a reminder for me about, she wears it close to her heart and how pierced the hearts have been. And even in saying that makes me think of Yeshua, and the crown of thorns, and that was a goddess symbol, all that stuff. So, yeah.
I have such mixed feelings about such gratitude that you sent her across the ocean, and feeling like I should have let her stay with you, because it's such, you are so sacred, but she is doing very deep, important, and I think she loves being with Joan.
No, I knew she was to go. She took her time in leaving, and I kept getting obstacles like the posting, and then you said to me, maybe she's meant to stay, and I did ask her, but I absolutely knew that, and it felt right. It felt like a real, it just felt right, and that's how it is. But when I've made other dolls, she's the biggest I've ever made, both in character and in size, because normally they're this big and she's this big. But that was her, that was her choice. So,
Polly, this is just such a joy to hear her story, her teachings, her wisdom, the ceremony that completed her time. How long? She announced her name in May, and you sent her to me. I have it on my calendar the day she arrived. So she was several months in creation, no?
Well, I started her on Beltane. And I sent her just before the pilgrimage started. And so I'd finished her probably, she took me about 3 weeks of pretty constant.
So this is interesting. She arrived for me on June 1st.
Yeah.
Well,
I started her on May the 1st.
on May 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something very perfect there. Something very, very perfect.
Mm.
Well, Hyldemoer, do you have any final words that you want to say to your beautiful Polly? Polly, what do you hear her saying to you?
I just hear her saying it's time. It's time. And keep going. Keep
Well,
going.
and isn't that in Joan's invocation?
Yeah,
Her
yeah.
words are, daughter, go on, go on, go on. Well, may you go on to create magnificent paintings and songs and witch dolls and anything else Spirit leads you to create, because you are a blessed, blessed creator. If ever there was a mystic witch, her name is Polly Paton Brown.
Bless you. It's been a privilege and an honor. And a privilege and an honor to walk with you for all, I don't know how many years it is now, but I had no idea when I picked up that book, writing down your soul, what it was going to lead to. I had no idea.
Well, if it led to Hyldemoer, it's a beautiful, beautiful path. This is the sacred path. This is the sacred path that women, mystics, witches, through all of time have walked, but we were punished for it. And now, as Hyldemoer said, it's time. Speak up. Speak up. The time for reverence is now.